one of the things we have to realize is our delivery changes based on the type of sermon we're preaching. The type of sermon we're going to preach is determined by the audience who's going to hear us and the end result that we want to have. We have three services on Sundays at Bayview: 7:30 a.m., 9:15 a.m., and 11:15 a.m., and they are all three different churches. It's one church, but those audiences are different. So even though I'm preaching the same sermon, my delivery may be different. And people tell me all the time, you didn't preach that at 7:30. I did. I was just preaching to a different crowd, so my delivery was different. When you're preaching difficult topics like Sunday, a lot of people preach and they talked about current events. I am one who does not often preach about current events. I do not really preach about current events. I might post about them sometimes. I might send our congregation communications about it sometimes, but I really don't do a lot of preaching on current events because the people who come to Bayview uh, they usually come in crisis because it's such a young church. It's a military church. It's a college town. We have a lot of turnover. Those young people come from culture and they come in crisis. And so they really don't want a lot of what they've already had all week. And so my preaching during times like this has to be consistent to keep them focused, because if not, we can easily lose focus and turn from God to political parties, political lines, political agendas, cultural agendas, and we can get off base. And so I have to make sure I'm the balance. But one thing I will say is one thing I've started to do more because it's necessary, not because I'm comfortable with it. And one thing I've done with my preaching team, I'm building a preaching team. We work together on the sermons. And so whether I'm preaching or not, whether I'm in a series or not, if I'm here, the voice remains the same. And that is me teaching them what prophetic preaching is. Most people, when they hear prophetic, they think of, they think contemporarily, I can say. Uh, a prophet is somebody who can tell you about your life and see the future. That's what they call a prophet. If you have a prophet or a prophetess in town, there's somebody that can look at you and say, hey, here's what you, in 2 weeks you're going to. No, 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 no. Prophetic preaching is not foretelling, it's forth telling. A prophet in the word was a forth teller. They spoke. Every prophet that you find in the Bible would say, here is the word of the Lord, not what the Lord is showing me, but what the Lord is saying through me. And I believe we've got a convoluted kind of definition of what the prophetic is now. It has to be like Miss Cleo and her friends. Somebody got to tell me my future. And I always tell people, you want to know your future, look at your past. Good indicator. But neither here nor there. We are to be forthtelling. So what is the Lord saying, or what has he said? And so when I preach on social justice issues, when I preach um, on injustice, when I preach on unity or equity, equality, whatever it is, I'm being prophetic, but I'm forthtelling. I'm repeating what the Lord has already said, and I'm bringing it to you in a way that you can understand it contextually, historically, and contemporarily. And if all three don't match, and if I can't make all three on the same plane, I don't touch it, which means I don't understand it. And so that means the Lord isn't speaking to me. In my opinion, the Lord is not speaking to me in that moment on that subject, because I can't connect historically, contextually, and contemporarily. And so I kind of stay away from it. So I don't allow myself to be forced in positions of preaching because of headlines or current events. So that's just a safe way for me not to put myself out there and have to apologize. If I'm gonna apologize, I'm gonna apologize for being silly, uh, but I'm not going to apologize for speaking out of the will of God. And so if we're going to be compelling, which means we want to We want people to respond. We have to preach in a way that causes people to respond. There are several ways to preach a sermon. You can preach exegetically, you can preach expository preaching, you can preach thematically, you can preach deductive messages, you can preach inductive messages. I'm in a series on Gideon, so it's very inductive, where I kind of tease people up front and then I make my points. Um, how can I say that? I think I'm saying that right. Let me look at my notes. Yeah, I kind of tease people and then give them the truth. So it's kind of like I give you something in the beginning and I leave you hanging, and then I'm into the sermon and then I bring you back to where I left you hanging. And that just kind of pulls people into a story, especially when it's a narrative. And then there's a deductive preaching where I give you the truth up front, and my task is to unpack or unfold the word of God or that text to show you the truth I've already pronounced up front. If I'm wanting people to learn something, if I'm teaching them something that's doctrinal, if I'm teaching them from the epistles, if I'm teaching them from the pastoral letters, this is where I'm probably going to preach deductive sermons, because here is the truth and here is the proof. I'm making a case, I'm building a case. In our culture, we would say, I'm arguing the text, I'm arguing the point I've already made. Where in inductive preaching, I'm giving you an idea that I know you're not thinking as I'm thinking, and then I'm going to help you unthink so that we can think together by the time I get to that point, which is more emotional, more um, passionate, but it's almost like I have to talk them into the pages of the Bible. So they're standing there. If I'm talking about David and Goliath, they smell the dust, they feel the rocks as they're walking on it. If I'm talking about the Hebrew boys, they smell smoke while I'm preaching. I'm bringing them into that story. Or an inductive method is to bring people into the text and show them they could be hypocritical if they were playing a part, which means they have those masks. So you can be David and Goliath. You can be David and Saul, to make them see a little bit of everybody in themselves so they don't always feel like the hero of the story. Because if we're always the hero of the story, it's always somebody else's fault. We're always being attacked. We're always being oppressed, but we never need to be repentant, because I can be like David, but sometimes I've been Saul, and so we have to be able to find ourselves. So we have to be able to present our sermons in such a way. You have to be persuasive, you have to be compassionate, but you also have to be very dialed into the Holy Ghost to get somebody to admit to being the villain in any story. But that's something we don't do. We proclaim that people are the victim, but we never get them to own up to it on their own. It's because some of our deliveries, I grew up in a delivery where preachers preached at us, not to us. And so it was always you, not we. When I give an inductive point, if I say God will change your trajectory, I say God will change my trajectory. When I was talking about Gideon, I say, God, here's where God will tighten my circle. I always make it personal. So even when they repeat it back to me, um, they're putting themselves in the message. Um, I had, and I don't know if this is cool. You tell me, Dr. June. I have two introductions of sermons that I wanted to just read so they can see where I was going. And I'm gonna read these. I'm not gonna preach them, so don't get the organ or nothing ready. But I do want to just share uh, just this introduction. So I preached the sermon. It was from Matthew chapter 5, 13 through 15. It was stay salty and shine bright. And this is a sermon where I needed them to get in the pages and understand with me just who Jesus was talking to. We know what he said, but why he said it and how he said it. So I started off saying, imagine standing in the crowd, tired, weary souls, people who've been beaten down by life, people who've been crushed under the boots of Roman oppression. They've been bruised by the cold stares of religious elites who said they were never good enough. These religious elites who said they were never holy enough, said they were never pure enough. As you can imagine, the air is thick with the dust of disappointment and the scent of desperation. The people that Jesus is speaking to are not the powerful, nor are they the praised. They are the forgotten, they're the overlooked, and they're the ordinary. Yet Jesus, this rabbi who touched lepers, this Jesus who spoke with outcasts and turned the fishermen into followers, he opens his mouth and says something so outrageous that it had to stun the entire hillside into silence. He looked at them and said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Not you will be if you work hard enough, you are now. Not you might be if you pray long enough, but you are now. Not you could be if you clean yourself up good enough, but you are right now. In your brokenness, you are the salt of the earth. In your poverty, you're the light of the world. In your pain, you are everything that should stay salty and shine bright." So what I've done there is I've brought people into the text immediately because the people Jesus was speaking to are just like me. And so when you understand that the people in the text represent us and we are representing Jesus, we have to make people feel like Jesus is speaking directly to them. It can't be a sermon about back then and them, or else it has no bearing on me and right now. So if the word is the living word, how do we make it the living word? And that's just a way, my presentation, I always want to make people feel like they are a part of the sermon. So when you're delivering in your introduction, how are you making people decide in the first 5 minutes that this is a sermon I can't check my text messages in? This is a sermon that I can't check social media. This is a sermon that I can't do anything because I'm going to miss something that is tailor-made for me. Or is this just an academic outline and an academic sermon? Is this pericope is something I can just take notes and I can study it later because it's really a lesson for me to learn, not a lifestyle for me to learn or live. So you have to I have to make sure that I'm pulling people in the sermon and I'm delivering it in such a way that even in the beginning, it's kind of like my trailer for the sermon. You know, most movies we want to go see, because of the trailer. They picked out parts of the movie. Even when the movie is trash, they know how to pick parts out so that the trailer is awesome. What is your trailer in your sermon? Because unlike the movie theater, you have to play your trailer in your introduction to get people to sit and listen and watch. So you have to make them believe that if they tune out, there's something they are going to miss that and you have to make it so plain. Like when I started talking, and stop me if I'm going out of, off course or out of bounds, Megan or Najim, y'all can stop me. But when I'm talking about salt and light, why salt? And I said, you have to understand, I bring them into the text because when Jesus said this, they were probably standing right on the road that was hardened. People had been walking on it, but they don't understand that there would have been white residue all over this path. Why? Because when salt lost its saltiness, because moisture got to it, or other elements got to it that polluted it and not purified it, it would lose its saltiness. And so they would throw it out on the road because it was a good weed killer and it would kill grass and it would harden these roads that they can walk on. And so when Jesus was talking about salt that has lost its saltiness, he could probably point to it. And I said, I'm looking at some people who are now feeling like that white residue. You don't taste like you should. When people meet you, they don't get a good taste of Jesus. When people see you, they don't get a good picture of Jesus. So every element of this text, of this narrative, I'm trying to help us discover ourselves in. And I'm very transparent. I'm probably overly transparent because I put myself first in any situation of imperfection. So the first imperfect person we're going to talk about in any point in my sermon is me. I'm going to lay myself out on the line because I know God loves humans. And if I can make myself human, then the humans I'm talking to that are feeling like I felt before will know that what God has done for me, he's still willing to do for them. And so that's one way uh, that now, especially now, when people are feeling so overlooked and devalued and disrespected and unworthy, I do more trying to bring them up to believe that you're worth it. And so that's one way I do it. And then there's other ways. That was just straight text. That's context and culture, all I used in that sermon. I didn't have to use my imagination. I just had to realize where Jesus was, who he was talking to, and what was going on, and how the Romans played, into it, and going into fight. Are you worth your salt? They paid Roman soldiers in salt. So it was so much stuff about that it was just context and culture. That's all I did. Uh, and that was expository. But then I told you that's deductive. There's an inductive method. And I did this Sunday. I'm in a sermon series on Gideon called The Warrior Within. And it's designed to wake up that part inside of you that you didn't realize was there, but God knew all the time. And so I finally got to chapter 7 this week, 3 sermons in chapter 6, chapter 7. And it was, verses 1 through 8, where God is about to reduce the army from 32,000 to 300. And my sermon title was The Reduction. And I started out by saying, when I've heard most people preach about Gideon, they talked about how God subtracted from his army. And so the first thing I did was make a difference between subtraction and a reduction. I said subtraction just takes something away. It leaves you with less money, less help. Subtraction feels like absence, like a canceled plan or empty chair, but reduction is different. Reduction removes in order to reveal. It's not about loss, it's about concentration. I said subtraction is arithmetic, reduction is alchemy. And so one strips and strengthens. And so I talked about all this. And finally, I got to a point where I said I had to sit down. I had no idea what a reduction was. So I had to actually sit down and go on YouTube and watch, in my opinion, too many different shows about cooking, because it's way too many. But I had to sit till I found one where a chef was making a reduction. And he caught my attention because he looked in the camera and said, "Don't rush it, let it reduce." And so I talked about how he explained, he put all this stuff in the pot. He had vegetables, he had seafood, he had herbs, he had broth. He put wine in it. I'm like, well, I don't drink wine. Why you cook with wine? What's the point of wine? And I know baby has wine drinkers, so I just joked about wine for a while. But then I said he started to make it simmer. And it wasn't a reckless flame that would burn anything. It was a steady flame that said you had to have patience. And I said, I can tell by looking at the studio audience that the aroma started to fill the room. And now I'm looking at everybody and they're hungry, thinking about what they cooked. Uh, and I said, it got smaller. Everything that wasn't essential began to evaporate. He skimmed off the foam that had a hint of the flavor, but it would have diluted the true flavor. And the broth darkened and it deepened and the flavors concentrated until what was left, it was smaller, but it was also stronger. It was less, but somehow it was more. And my immediate transition was, that's the great paradox of every reduction, subtraction for the sake of strength. And a reduction does not apologize for being smaller. It rejoices because it's pure. And I went right into that. And so now they're not looking at God subtracting things from their life. That's negative. They're looking at God reducing things in their life, which is positive. And so I've drawn them into this text. And so immediately they're starting to look at their situations from a different perspective. So my job is easier because now I don't have to tell them the negative is coming. I'm going to give you the positive and what you thought was a negative. And so we walked through this whole sermon and 16 people joined Sunday again because their life was turned. And so my end result was to make them feel like even though it feels like all the odds are against you, it's because Jesus is used to beating the odds. He never did anything when he had the upper hand, because miracles don't happen when you have the upper hand. Miracles only happen in miserable moments. You can't find a miracle that happened when everything was okay. And you have to remind people that sometimes, that, You get into this situation is not a bad thing because now God can do his thing. And so you have to find out what's your end result. What do you want people to know by the time you get through? And you have to spend all of your time getting them to that moment. I spent all of my time getting them to one point where I can say my sermon in a sentence and they have to believe it. So we have to ask ourselves in presentation that the time that we've spent, does it help our thesis ring true? It's a lot of stuff you can find when you're studying. If you study on logos like me, oh my God, you have rabbit trails upon rabbit trails upon rabbit trails upon rabbit trails. I'll study and have 16 pages of information, and I got 3 when I get ready to preach. Because I know just because it's right to say, just because I can say it doesn't mean I should say it. And my grandmother used to say, when you're cooking a meal, taste it in the kitchen before you serve it at the table. So give people the cooked meal, not the recipe. Recipes don't take away hunger pains, but a meal will. So if you're going to be a compelling preacher, when you stand up, what have you done to get them to your end result? We can't leave all of it on their shoulders. Now you got to make a decision. No, your decision should already be made for you because I've given you enough information and persuasion through the text that you should be feeling like I'm feeling about this text and about what God is saying. And so we can't put it all. Communication falls on the point of the person communicating, not just the person listening.